Emily had been divorced for almost a year, but the emptiness in her house still felt fresh. She lived in a quiet Oregon town surrounded by pine trees and soft rain, yet nothing about her life felt peaceful. Every morning she made coffee for one, and every night she sat in front of the television pretending she wasn't lonely. She told herself she was doing fine, that time would heal everything, but deep down, she missed the sound of another voice in the house. Then, one gray afternoon, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer when she saw the name Jake. The last time she'd seen him was moving out after college, full of plans and confidence. He was Mark's son from his first marriage. And during the years Emily had been married to Mark, she had grown close to Jake. She had helped raise him in small ways, driving him to practice, cooking dinners when his father worked late, listening when he needed advice. But after the divorce, contact faded, and she hadn't heard from him since. Now, his voice on the other end was older, steadier, but carried something broken. "Hey, Em," he said softly, using the nickname he always had. "I'm sorry for calling like this, but things haven't been good lately. I just separated from my wife. I need somewhere to stay for a bit, just until I figure things out." For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to say, no, not because she didn't care, but because she wasn't sure she was ready to reopen the door to that part of her past. But she could hear the weariness in his voice, the kind that comes from disappointment and heartbreak. She knew that tone too well. "Of course, Jake," she finally said, her voice gentle. "You can come anytime. This house still has your room." 2 days later, he arrived. When Emily opened the door, she almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't the boy she remembered. He had broad shoulders now, short hair, a few days of stubble, and eyes that carried too many stories. Yet behind the tiredness, there was still that same warmth, kind, respectful, quiet. He smiled when he saw her, and for the first time in months, Emily felt a flicker of something like relief. "It's really good to see you," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. His touch was gentle, but there was weight in it, like two people holding on to something familiar in a world that had changed too much. They talked over dinner that night, pasta, garlic bread, and soft music playing in the background. Jake told her about his marriage ending, how he had tried to make it work, but some things just fell apart no matter how much love you gave them. Emily listened quietly, nodding at the right moments, offering small comfort. She didn't ask about Mark, and Jake didn't bring him up. It felt like an unspoken rule between them. When the dishes were done, Jake helped her clean the table, and for a moment, Emily noticed how different he seemed, older, more thoughtful, but also gentler. The way he moved around the kitchen, how he thanked her for the meal, how his voice lowered when he said "good night, Tit," all felt strange and familiar at once. That night, when she went to bed, the house didn't feel so empty anymore. The faint sound of Jake moving around in the guest room was oddly comforting. Still, as she lay in the dark, her thoughts wandered to how strange life could be. A year ago, she had been married, trapped in arguments and distance. Now she was divorced, and her ex-husband's grown son was sleeping down the hall in the morning. Emily found Jake already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cold and smelled like rain. She joined him quietly. For a while, they didn't speak. They just watched the fog roll down the hills. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," he said finally. "The city's so loud, you can't hear yourself think." Emily smiled softly. "That's why I stayed. I needed quiet after everything." He looked at her then, not just with sympathy, but understanding. "You look happy, Em, or at least more at peace." "Some days," she said, her voice low. "Other days I still wake up expecting everything to be how it used to be." Jake nodded, and the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, was warm, familiar. There was something healing about being around someone who didn't need explanations. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Emily cooked. Jake fixed small things around the house. He repaired a leaky faucet, painted the porch railing, even mowed the lawn without being asked. Emily appreciated his help, but more than that, she enjoyed his presence. The sound of another voice in the house, the casual laughter, The conversations about books and music, it all brought life back into her world. One evening, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows. Emily sat on the couch reading while Jake watched a movie. A quiet peace filled the room. Every so often, she'd glance at him, how relaxed he looked. How different his energy was from Mark's, where Mark had been sharp and restless. Jake was calm, patient, thoughtful. She quickly pushed the thought aside. It wasn't right to compare them. Still, it lingered somewhere in the back of her mind. Later that night, as she was heading to her room, Jake spoke from the couch, his voice low. "Thanks for letting me stay, Em. I don't think I said that properly." She turned to him, smiling. "You don't have to thank me. This is still your home, Jake." He looked at her for a moment, his eyes reflecting the soft light from the lamp. "It feels like home again," he said quietly. Those words stayed with her long after she went to bed. She lay awake, listening to the rain, wondering why her heart felt both heavy and light at the same time. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was comfort, familiarity, a reminder that kindness still existed in her life. But deep inside, Emily knew something had shifted, something quiet but undeniable. She didn't know what it meant yet. All she knew was that the house didn't feel like it used to. The laughter, the small talks, the warmth, they had returned, but not in the same way. There was a new kind of energy in the air, something delicate and hard to name. As she closed her eyes, she realized this was the first night in a long time that she didn't feel alone. Still, a quiet question lingered in her chest. What if this comfort turned into something else? The answer would come soon enough. But for now, all Emily could do was breathe, listen to the rain, and hope she was strong enough for whatever was changing between them. A few weeks passed since Jake moved in, and the house that once felt like a museum of Emily's past slowly began to feel alive again. She started cooking proper dinners, keeping fresh flowers on the table, even opening the curtains each morning. The quiet that used to bother her was replaced with laughter and conversation. Jake's presence had changed everything, and though she tried to tell herself it was simply nice to have company again, a deeper warmth began to settle in her heart when she didn't quite understand. Jake had started helping her with errands, fixing small things, and joining her for coffee on the porch every morning. They'd sit wrapped in blankets, talking about anything and everything, the weather, work, their mistakes and dreams they once had. Emily found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, not even Mark. Jake listened, not as a son might, but as a friend who genuinely cared. He didn't try to solve her problems. He just understood them. One morning, as mist floated above the pine trees, Jake turned to her and said, "You know, Em, I used to think my dad had everything figured out. But now I realize he was just lost in his own way." Emily looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his tone. "We all get lost," she said softly. "Some of us just pretend we're not." He smiled, that quiet half-smile that always reached his eyes. "You never pretended. That's what I always liked about you." She felt her heart skip just for a second and quickly looked away, pretending to sip her coffee. She wasn't used to compliments anymore, especially ones that felt so genuine. For a moment, she wondered if he realized how much his words affected her. Later that week, while cleaning the old study, Emily found a dusty box of family photos. She carried it to the living room where Jake was fixing the leg of a chair. "I think these belong to you," she said, setting the box down. He wiped his hands and joined her on the couch. They spent the evening looking through pictures, birthdays, vacations, holidays. There were photos of Mark and Jake at the lake, and one that made Emily stop. It was from a trip to the beach years ago. Jake, his father, and her. She looked younger then, carefree, her arm around Jake's shoulders. Both of them laughing at something unseen. Jake noticed her staring at it. "That was a good day," he said quietly. "You remember how Dad fell into the water trying to impress everyone with his fishing skills?" Emily laughed, the memory bright in her mind. "He was furious we couldn't stop laughing." For a moment, they both smiled at the shared memory. But then Jake's tone changed, softer, more personal. "You were the only one who ever really cared, Ev. You were always there. even when Dad wasn't. The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked at him, seeing not the young boy she used to know, but a man wounded, honest, and kind. There was something in his eyes that felt deeper than gratitude. It was warmth mixed with sadness. A connection that neither of them could ignore. Emily quickly looked away, her chest tightening. "I just did what anyone would do," she murmured. "No," Jake said, his voice firm but gentle. "Not everyone would have." Silence filled the room, heavy and tender. For a long moment they simply sat there, side by side, the sound of rain outside wrapping around them like a blanket. Emily could feel her pulse quicken, not from fear but from confusion. She knew she shouldn't let her thoughts go where they were going. This was Jake, her ex-husband's son. But her heart wasn't listening to rules anymore. That night she couldn't sleep. She turned from side to side trying to calm her thoughts, but Jake's words kept echoing in her mind. "You were the only one who ever really cared." She remembered how he had looked at her steady, unguarded. It wasn't the look of a lost boy. It was the look of someone who finally felt seen. In the morning, she tried to act normal. She cooked breakfast, hummed along to the radio, and smiled when Jake walked in. "Morning," he said, looking relaxed, his hair messy from sleep. "Coffee's ready." She replied quickly, trying to keep her tone light. But every time their eyes met, something unspoken lingered. A kind of tension that wasn't uncomfortable, just confusing. They both felt it, but neither dared to name it. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to take a walk by the river. Jake joined her. The path was quiet, lined with trees that were just starting to change color. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and wet earth. They talked about small things, music, books. His plans to start fresh, but beneath the conversation was something deeper. Something they both pretended not to notice. When they reached the small wooden bridge, they stopped to watch the water move beneath them. "I used to come here after arguments with Dad," Jake said suddenly. "You probably never knew. This place helped me clear my head." Emily looked at him, surprised. "You never told me that." "I didn't tell anyone," he admitted, then smiled faintly. "But I guess I always hoped you'd find me. You were the only one who ever tried to understand." Her breath caught. There was so much honesty in his words, it almost hurt. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat felt tight. The wind blew her hair across her face, and before she could brush it away, Jake gently reached out and tucked a strand behind her ear. It was such a simple gesture, yet it made time stop. Their eyes met, and for one fragile second, the world around them disappeared. Then Emily stepped back, her voice trembling slightly. "We should head home before it gets dark." Jake nodded, though his expression carried a mix of regret and understanding. "Yeah, you're right." The walk back was quiet. They didn't speak again, but both knew something had changed. A line had been crossed not with actions, but with feelings. That evening, Emily stayed in her room longer than usual, pretending to read. But every few minutes, she caught herself listening for his footsteps, wondering if he was thinking about what had happened. When she finally turned off the light, she whispered to herself, "This isn't right. Emily, don't let your heart go there." Yet deep down, she couldn't deny what was happening. It wasn't something planned or wanted. It was something human. Two lonely souls finding comfort in each other's understanding. And though she tried to push the thought away, the truth lingered quietly in her chest. Things between her and Jake were no longer the same. Something new was growing between them, something fragile, beautiful, and dangerous all at once. Emily didn't know where it would lead. But she knew one thing for sure, her heart had started to wake up again. And that, more than anything, scared her. The days after that quiet walk felt different. Something invisible hung in the air between Emily and Jake, a tension neither of them mentioned, but both could feel. The house was still warm and friendly, but there was a new energy to it, like every word. Every glance carried more weight than before. Emily tried to convince herself it was only her imagination. She told herself they were just two people rebuilding their lives under the same roof. But her heart wouldn't listen. Every time Jake smiled, every time his voice softened when he spoke to her, she felt something she didn't want to feel. Jake had started spending more time at home, helping with things she didn't even ask for. One morning, Emily found him fixing the garden fence that had been broken for months. "You don't have to do all this," she said, standing at the porch. He looked up and smiled. "I like helping. Keeps me busy." Wasn't just the fence. He painted the porch, cleaned out the shed, replaced light bulbs, cooked dinner when she was tired. The house began to look better than it had in years. But it wasn't only the repair set, was the feeling. Emily hadn't realized how much she missed being cared for. She often watched him from the kitchen window while he worked outside, sunlight catching the edge of his face, a look of calm focus on him. Sometimes he'd look up and catch her watching. He'd smile and she'd quickly look away, pretending to wipe the counter. But those small moments stayed with her long after he'd gone back to work at night. They'd sit in the living room, sometimes watching old movies, sometimes just talking. The conversations felt easy but filled with unspoken things. Emily noticed how gentle he was, his tone, his patience, the quiet strength he carried. It was everything her marriage had lacked. That realization made her both grateful and uneasy. One rainy evening, the power went out. The sky rumbled and the house went dark. Emily lit a few candles in the living room, their soft light bouncing off the walls. Jake came in with a blanket draped over his shoulders. "Looks like we'll be having an early night," he said with a half smile. She laughed, handing him a mug of tea. "I forgot how peaceful it can be without all the noise." They sat together on the couch, wrapped in separate blankets, watching the storm through the window. The sound of rain against the roof filled the silence. After a while, Jake spoke quietly. "You ever think about starting over, Em? Like really starting over? New city, new people, new everything." She thought for a moment. "I used to," she admitted. "But I think what I really want is peace. Not to run away, just to feel like I belong again." He nodded slowly. "You deserve that." Their eyes met in the flickering candlelight, and for a brief moment, the world felt still. There was something in the way he looked at her, not pity, not gratitude, but something deeper. A connection that had quietly grown stronger with every shared conversation, every small act of kindness. Emily's chest tightened. She looked away, pretending to fix her blanket. "We should probably get some rest," she said softly. "Yeah," Jake replied, though he didn't move right away. He just watched her for a moment longer before standing. "Good night, Em." When she went to bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said her name. It wasn't just a word. It was full of warmth, understanding, and something dangerously close to affection. She turned off the light and lay in the dark, her thoughts loud and restless. The next morning, they acted as though nothing had happened. Jake made breakfast, Emily brewed coffee, and the day went on as usual. But the silence between them wasn't the same. It was charged, delicate, almost fragile. They both seemed to be walking around an invisible line, careful not to cross it, though neither was sure where it really was anymore. That weekend, Emily's friend Laura came by for coffee. She hadn't visited since before the divorce. The two women sat on the porch, catching up. Jake waved from the yard as he loaded tools into his truck. "Is that Jake?" Laura asked, surprised. "He's grown up. I barely recognized him." Emily smiled faintly. "Yeah, he's been staying here for a while, helping out around the house." Laura gave her a teasing look. "He's very attentive." Emily's cheeks warmed. "It's not like that. He's family." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Maybe, but you look happier than I've seen you in years. Whatever he's bringing into this house, it's doing you good." After Laura left, Emily sat alone for a long time, thinking about those words. Was she happier because of Jake? Or because, for the first time in years, someone was treating her like she mattered? She didn't know the answer, but it scared her that the thought even crossed her mind that night. While washing dishes, Jake joined her at the sink. "You don't have to do that alone," he said, rolling up his sleeves. She smiled faintly. "I've been doing it alone for a long time. Kind of used to it." He looked at her, his voice soft. "You don't have to anymore." The words hit her heart like a whisper she wasn't supposed to hear. For a moment they stood there in silence, side by side, the sound of water running between them. The world outside was quiet, but inside everything felt louder thoughts, her heartbeat. The fear of what this was becoming. Later that evening, as she sat by the window reading, Jake walked past her room. He paused at the doorway. "I'm thinking of going back to work soon," he said. "I need to move forward, get my life back in order." Emily nodded, hiding the ache in her chest. "That's good, Jake. You should." He hesitated, as if wanting to say something more. But instead, he smiled and said, "Thanks for everything, Em. Really?" When he left, the silence in the hallway returned, and it hurt more than she expected. The next few days felt heavy. They both tried to act normal, but there was distance now. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Fear of what they might be feeling, fear of what others would think, fear of ruining something good. One evening, she found Jake sitting outside, staring at the sunset. She joined him quietly. "You've been quiet lately," she said. He gave a small smile. "Just thinking, trying to figure out where I belong." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'll find your place. You always do." He turned to her, his voice low. "I'm not sure I want to leave here. This feels like home again." Her heart caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that his presence had brought light back into her life. But instead, she just smiled. Because some truths were too complicated to say out loud. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily realized something important. Love doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. And sometimes the most powerful feelings are the ones you never intend to have. But she also knew boundaries mattered. What they shared was real kindness, healing, understanding, but it couldn't become something else. She wasn't sure where this fragile connection would lead. But she knew one thing for certain. They were both learning how to feel again, and sometimes that was enough. The weeks after that quiet evening were heavy with silence. Emily and Jake both felt the weight of what had grown between them, but neither spoke about it. The warmth that once filled the house had turned into something complicated, a mix of care, guilt, and unspoken affection. Emily knew it couldn't last like this. Every glance, every small smile carried a meaning she didn't want to face. It wasn't wrong in words or actions, but in feelings that had crossed lines they both understood too well. One morning, Emily woke before sunrise. The sky was a soft gray, and the world outside was still. She made coffee and sat by the window, staring at the quiet road that led to the hills. Jake's footsteps sounded behind her. "You're up early," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "I couldn't rest," she replied. "Too much on my mind." He poured himself a cup and sat across from her. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy. Finally, Jake spoke. "I've been thinking about leaving him. Maybe it's time I find my own place again." She felt her heart tighten, though she had known this moment would come. "That's probably a good idea," she said softly. "You've been here long enough to heal. It's time to start fresh." Jake looked down, turning his cup in his hands. "I don't want you to think I'm leaving because I'm unhappy. This place, you've helped me more than you know." Emily smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything, Jake. I just wanted you to feel safe while you figured things out." He nodded, but his expression said more than his words. There was gratitude there. And something deeper, something that would always remain unsaid. That evening, Emily decided to take a drive to the coast, something she hadn't done in years. The beach was quiet, the waves calm under a pale orange sky. The air was cool and smelled of salt and pine. She walked barefoot along the shore, thinking about everything that had happened, the divorce, the loneliness, and then Jake's return. Somehow, life had taken her full circle. Back to the same place where she had first learned how to let go. She didn't hear his footsteps until he was beside her. Jake had followed her there, a soft smile on his face. "I had a feeling you'd come here," he said. "You always talked about how this place clears your mind." Emily looked out at the water. "It reminds me that life keeps moving, no matter how much we hold on to the past." Jake stood beside her in silence, their shoulders almost touching. After a while, he spoke quietly. I don't know what to call what's been happening between us, Em, but I know it's real. You mean something to me. More than I can explain. Her eyes filled with tears, though she smiled. You mean something to me too, Jake? But maybe it's not meant to be what we think it is. Maybe we were just meant to help each other heal. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Still, it's hard to walk away from something that feels this right. Emily turned toward him, her voice gentle but steady. Sometimes love isn't about holding on, Jake. It's about knowing when to let go before it becomes something it shouldn't. The words lingered between them, carried away by the wind. For a long time, neither spoke. They just stood there, watching the waves break and pull away again, like two hearts learning to release what they couldn't keep. When the sun dipped below the horizon, they walked back to the car in silence. On the drive home, Jake's hand rested on the edge of the window, the wind tugging at his hair. He looked peaceful, almost relieved. Emily felt a quiet sadness, but also calm. She knew this was the right ending. The next morning, Jake packed his things. The house was filled with the soft sound of drawers closing and boxes being taped shut. Emily helped him fold some clothes, her hands brushing against his once or twice. Every touch felt like a small goodbye. When everything was ready, they stood by the door for a long moment. You'll be okay, she asked, trying to smile. He nodded. I think so. You gave me a place to breathe again. I won't forget that. She reached out and touched his arm gently. Take care of yourself, Jake. You deserve happiness. He hesitated, then smiled a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. You do too, ma'am. You've spent too long taking care of everyone else. It's your turn now. They hugged, a long, quiet embrace that said everything words couldn't. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper. A connection born out of kindness, pain, and shared healing. When Jake stepped outside, the morning light spilled across the porch. He turned once more before getting into his truck. You'll always be home to me, he said. Then he drove away. The sound of the engine fading down the long road until there was only silence again. Emily stood there for a long time, the breeze brushing her hair, the world still and gentle. The house behind her felt empty again, but it wasn't the same kind of emptiness as before. It was peaceful, quiet, almost comforting. She walked through the rooms, noticing the small things Jake had fixed, the polished railing, the painted porch, the garden that finally looked alive. Every corner carried a trace of him. A reminder of how two broken people had helped each other find balance again that night. Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. She felt grateful for the pain, the healing, and the strange path life had taken to bring her back to herself. She realized that love could exist in many forms. It didn't always need to end with a promise or a future together. Sometimes love was simply being there when someone needed you most, and walking away when it was time. Jake had left. But he had also given her something priceless, a courage to open her heart again as the night grew darker. Emily smiled softly and whispered to herself, some people come into our lives to stay forever, and some only long enough to remind us that we can still feel. The rain started to fall lightly, just as it had on the day Jake first arrived. Emily closed her eyes and listened to it, not with sadness, but with peace. The story between them had ended, but it had ended right with understanding, respect, and quiet love that didn't need to be spoken to be real. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows. Emily brewed her coffee, opened the porch door, and stepped outside. The air was fresh, the world new again. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she would be fine. She had found strength in the most unexpected place, and a connection that taught her that healing doesn't always come from love stories that last, but from the ones that change us. And as she watched the world wake around her, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope.